Hello and welcome to our latest show of From the HRC, a program from the Township of Lower Merion's Human Relations Commission. I'm Kyle Allen, a member of the commission, and my guest today is Jeri Lynne Johnson, founder and artistic director of the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra, a professional ensemble in Philadelphia. Jeri is a graduate of Wellesley College and the University of Chicago. She is also the recipient of numerous prestigious conducting scholarships, has collaborated with Jay-Z, Alicia Keys, and The Roots. And in 2005, Jeri made history as the first African-American woman to win an international conducting prize when she was awarded Tachy Concordia Conducting Fellowship. In addition, Jeri has broken barriers in Europe and the United States as the first African-American woman on the podium for many orchestras, and has conducted the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Dallas Symphony, the Bournemouth Symphony, the Weimar Staatskapelle, and this year, Jeri's conducting engagements include the Oregon Bach Festival, the National Symphony, Santa Fe Opera, Chicago Opera Theater, and New Orleans Opera. Jeri, welcome to From the HRC, and thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here.
Okay, so obviously, given your bio, music, a big part of your life is classical music. And not just the music itself, but as a conductor and as a leader. And I have to admit, even though we've talked briefly about conducting, I'm still not exactly sure what it is a conductor does. So I was hoping right off the bat, you could explain the role of a conductor, what a conductor does, and particularly, as you've explained to me in the past, which I thought really interesting, is to explain your role in helping to shape the silence as a conductor.
Sure. I think most people have a perception, somewhat erroneously, but a very natural one, that when you see a conductor on the stage and we're waving that stick around called a baton, that the baton is our instrument. But in fact, the baton makes no sound. And so our instrument is the body of 80 or 100 musicians in front of us. Our instrument is, in effect, the orchestra. And so once people understand that, again, another erroneous perception that people have, and that's kind of been developed through what I call, that stereotype of the maestro, where you have this kind of very domineering, kind of command and control style leadership of an older gentleman, kind of, shaking his fist at the orchestra, cajoling them, bullying them into making music, and that the orchestra is just kind of at this person's whims, essentially, really being dominated by him. And that kind of maestro stereotype doesn't really hold true. Our job as conductors is not to manage every single aspect of the orchestra. Our job is really to shape the silence out of which the music emerges. And so this is just a very different leadership paradigm that I explain to people, especially as we're going through a lot of upheaval and people are looking about different styles of leadership. How do you lead in very challenging and adaptive times? And one of the things when I explain to people that you can't control everything, you can't control your people, that actually stifles creativity, that your job as the leader or the visionary for your company is really to create the circumstances under which the skills and the talents and the experience and the creativity of your team are able to rise to the challenge to create music. And so it's just a very different way of creating a collaborative working environment. Now, I'm still in charge. That doesn't mean I've abdicated my responsibility or my leadership in that moment. What that means is I've built a team who I trust. I've created an environment in which my expectations are clear, and that I've given them a vision of what I want to happen. And then I step back and give them and empower them to be able to do that and to work together to make that happen. And so it's just a very different leadership paradigm.
So it sort of sounds like you could generalize what you're doing to being like a leader of a company, like a CEO of a company, sort of managing different departments and coordinating things and maybe shaking your hand occasionally when you need to get people to do what they need to do.
Exactly. It's this kind of spiral where I'm using my position of power to create certain things, and then I'm allowing the strength of the team that I've built to execute. And so it's actually this kind of spiral of trust that develops between the leader and the team, where they're empowered to do things and we have the vision to manage the direction and the flow. And that's kind of how greater creativity and innovation is really built into an organization. It's really important that you have a clarity as a leader in terms of your vision and you're able to communicate that clearly. But it's also equally important that you build a team, A, that you trust, and B, that has all the diverse skills and perspectives and experiences that you need to get the job done.
Okay. And I understand you have some clips of the Black Pearl Orchestra with you conducting that you're going to share with us today. And I was wondering if we could cue those up and if you could please give us a little prelude of what we're about to hear.
Certainly. So the first is I wanted to give people just kind of an overview of Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra. One of the things that is our niche in the market is that we are the country's most diverse professional orchestra. You know, the blessing of being in Philadelphia is that we have the wonderful Curtis Institute of Music right in our backyard. But we're also, we're in proximity to the Juilliard School in New York, and also Peabody down in Baltimore. And so we're just at a very sweet spot of the world's greatest classical music talent right here on the Northeast, along the Northeast corridor. And so for me, I thought it was really important to create a model of diversity, equity, inclusion that is sorely lacking in classical music today. And so Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra has musicians who teach at or graduated from these august institutions, who are African American, Middle Eastern, Latin American, European Americans, people from Europe, and from different parts of Asia as well. And that was important considering the fact that Philadelphia itself is what they call a majority minority city. And so it was important for me, not just as a moral imperative around diversity, but as a business imperative for us to be able to attract these diverse audiences into our concert hall. And so what you're going to see is our success in actually achieving that. This is a performance at one of our favorite venues in the city, the Philadelphia Episcopal Cathedral at 38th and Chestnut. It's got a beautiful acoustic, and it's nice and open. And so there is no real kind of, the orchestra is not high up on a stage and the orchestra is down below us. There's more of an equal relationship between the ensemble and the audience. And that was something else we wanted. We wanted to create that, that relationship with them, that more reciprocal kind of give and take between the two groups. And so that's what you'll see in our performance. We're offering you, this is kind of the opening of Haydn Symphony number 44 in E minor, called Trauer, or Morning Symphony. It's one of his kind of, if you're familiar with classical music, it's part of his middle period of symphonies, the Sturm und Drang. So here's the Haydn Symphony number 44. So Kyle, what you'll see in that clip as you pan between the audience and the orchestra is as diverse as the audience is. There isn't this real bifurcation between this very kind of uniform, monochromatic symphony orchestra up on a stage with an equally uniform and monochromatic audience down below. There really is this mutually beneficial and reciprocal kind of relationship where the audience and the orchestra look exactly alike. The difference is, of course, we have the instruments, but that's what we wanted. We wanted to create just this more energy, more give and take between the orchestra and the community.
So there was something you said in introducing those clips that caught my eye, and it had to do with the business standpoint of diversity. And I'm paraphrasing you, but essentially diversity is good for business. There's a business aspect to diversity, and I'm so glad to see that belief reaffirmed, because I think it's a point often lost on people who get blinded by prejudice. There are, in addition to human importance of diversity and inclusion, there are economic benefits to this. I'm a big believer in the economic importance of diversity, and I think a lot of societal issues arise from wealth inequality and poverty. And when I think about this, I often mention the anecdote from Bill Gates, where he was speaking at the World Economic Forum, and he's looking out at an audience, and there's women on one side and men on the other side, and somebody says, Bill Gates, do you think we can achieve our goals to becoming a world leader by 2010? And he looks out and he says, look, you're marginalizing half of your potential workforce, then there's no way you're going to achieve those goals. And so I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit more about how you see diversity from a business perspective in general, and in particular with respect to the Black Pearl?
Certainly. And it's so important. I think the first thing that I want to say is it's extremely important, again, given the political climate that we're in, to understand that diversity applies to living systems generally. When people talk about diversity, they kind of mean just generally biodiversity, people who look different. That is a basic, existing sort of a state of living organisms. Biodiversity is a fact. And so it's important, I think, especially from a business standpoint, to understand that while the election in some people's minds may be contested, or people have different feelings about that, large chunks of society need to be able to coexist in a democracy in order for it to function. And therefore, part of diversity needs to be political diversity, ideological diversity, all different ways of all of us being able to work together. Because as a business imperative, again, you can't marginalize half the people, whether they're women, whether they're African American, whether they're people of a different gender orientation, whether they're of a different political party. It's important that we all work together, and that to be able to engage in that will help you grow your business.
Okay, thanks. We have to take a break right now, but we'll be back with more from the HRC with Jeri Lynne Johnson after these messages. We are back from the HRC. I'm speaking with Jeri Lynne Johnson of the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra. And when we left off, we were talking about Jeri's thoughts on diversity and the economic importance of it and how it's good for business. And I wanted to shift, because we've sort of jumped around into what's been happening in the last year. You've mentioned current events. We also know, everybody who has not been living under a rock knows, that we've been living throughout the COVID pandemic. And one thing that's become abundantly clear is that in light of the pandemic, we don't do a lot of mass gatherings, face-to-face interaction. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how the pandemic has affected your musicians and the Black Pearl Orchestra generally. Are you still able to play concerts? Is there a space for music existing only virtually, as a lot of things have done? What has this done to your business, to your life, essentially?
Sure. Thank you. I think that's an important question. I want to kind of address that in two parts. One, just the business aspect, and one in terms of the artistic aspect. I think it's important for a lot of people to understand that my orchestra is a representative of a lot of arts and culture, I would say creative economy businesses. People assume that musicians are salaried if they're attached to an organization, and many times that is not the case. In fact, a lot of creative people are contract employees. They receive a lot of their income as 1099. And so they're doing a lot of different things. The Philadelphia Orchestra, they have a 52-week season, and so they're able to employ their musicians year round. But the vast majority of performing arts ensembles don't have year-round seasons. And so we tend to share a lot of musicians around. So my musicians will also play with the chamber orchestra or opera, or the ballet. And so we share resources. So that means they're going around from job to job. And so it's been extremely difficult for the vast majority, not just of musicians, but of creative people, of actors, dancers, and you name it, who have had shuttered venues and whose organizations are not allowing them to perform in certain ways. And so it's been extremely difficult. So now from an artistic standpoint, how that works out is we've been very fortunate to do a lot of things virtually. It's interesting that you mentioned the World Economic Forum at Davos. We were actually, Black Pearl was actually the only orchestra in North America to participate in Davos this year through a collaborative performance with Yo-Yo Ma and other orchestras around the world called See Me. It's a really beautiful thing, and you can find that on YouTube, and we'll make sure that you guys get the link for that to watch it. But it's just this gorgeous video collaborative of orchestras and choirs and artists and musicians from around the world, just kind of creating this artistic statement. And part of the reason we wanted to do that, again, was just to share beautiful art and music out across the world, because we know that if people have been remaining socially distanced or physically distanced, that they've been doing a lot more reading, a lot more movie watching, a lot more listening to music. And so being able to put stuff out digitally has been very important, just to sustaining the life work of our musicians. Because we don't want them to drop out of the job force. We want to keep their talents active and engaged. And so putting things online has really helped us be able to do that. As we look forward, my feeling is, while there's certainly a lot of excitement about returning to in-person programming, there's still a lot of reticence. There's still a lot of fear. There's still a long way to go in terms of getting people vaccinated, so we can get to the point in herd immunity where we can kind of have large groups of people together and feel a lot more comfortable about being together. And so I think it's important that as we think about transitioning to live performance, and the vaccines make that possible as we reach herd immunity, the value of the arts. Technology is wonderful, and it can help kind of distribute performances across an audience much larger than Philadelphia, again, across the world through YouTube and Facebook and other social media platforms. But I want to say in particular that live art performances in an ensemble in particular is a unique kind of, I would say, spiritual technology. I think the magic of the orchestra is that these instruments are being used to create a unique moment. That everyone present there shares, not just the musicians on stage creating the music, but the audience as well. And so there's something very unique and special about live performances that I think we've all missed. And so as wonderful, again, as digital technology is, it cannot really compare to the analog technology of the connection between human beings that a live performance offers.
Okay. So it sounds like you're continuing to innovate. You've been an innovator for a long time, including starting the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra to begin with. And that's nice to see that music is one of those places where you can innovate, but hopefully we'll get back to a little bit of normalcy, because I would certainly love to see a symphony in person. I've never been to see a symphony in person.
Kyle, you've never been? Oh my goodness.
I've never.
Now you have a standing invitation. One of the favorite things that we love to do at Black Pearl, especially for people like you who've never been to a live orchestra performance, we do something called I Conduct. We've done it for years and years. We did it down at City Hall and at the Mann Center. We were the first orchestra to perform at the Barnes Foundation when they moved to the Parkway, and we did a little bit of that in a performance of Beethoven. And we love to give people just a brief experience of what it feels like to conduct an orchestra. So I give everybody a little conducting lesson. People just get to throw their arms around and feel the power of the ability to just make music through their body, through their gestures. And it's once people kind of realize that, the orchestra isn't just kind of playing, that I'm really doing something, they're really paying attention to me, and that they have the power to do that as well. It's incredibly transformative. We actually do this with kids. We have an after-school program called Orchestrating Leadership, where we spend about 12 weeks with young people across the public school system in Philadelphia. We've done it in Lower Merion as well, where we bring our professional musicians out and we teach these kids how to conduct. And again, it's not about creating young conductors. It's not about, it's not just, I should say, it's not just about art and music education. It really gives them the social and emotional development around their sense of agency, of understanding that what you put out into the universe is what you get back. And so it teaches them to really begin to control their gestures and their mannerisms, and to be much more consciously aware of their attitudes and what they may not be aware that they're projecting. You know, people may see a frown on someone's face when really this person is concentrating on something, and people externally may read that as anger or disapproval or something. And so again, it teaches kids to be much more aware of their surroundings, of how they're communicating. And it's just important for them to understand that they have power within themselves, to be who they want to be, to communicate and get something through that communication, and to be effective that way. It's a very powerful tool, and we love to do that for adults and for young people. So Kyle, anyone in Lower Merion who's seeing this, Kyle, you're especially invited next Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra public performance. Come on down. We're going to do an I conduct, for you guys, and get up there, wave your arms around, have a great time.
Thank you. I would love that. Thank you. We've touched on a couple of times today some of the current events, and I mentioned before that I didn't realize how political or historically connected or diplomatically connected classical music is. And it seems like this period in time, perhaps unlike any other period, at least in my lifetime, seems to present a confluence of historical events that sort of cry out for music and artists and artistry and protest. And, like, we've got the pandemic, we've got violence against Black men and women, violence against Asian Americans, the Black Lives Matter nationwide protests, former president that made some extremely inflammatory remarks. And, I know that in prior interviews, you've talked about artists needing to sort of get off the sidelines. And on the other side of that are critics who will say, like particularly to LeBron James or something like that, they say, we don't vote for you, LeBron, we sort of pay to watch you play. And I'm wondering what your response is to that, as in the classical music industry. What can you do to sort of get off the sidelines and make your voice heard? And how do you combat critics that sort of say, you know what, Jeri, why don't you just stay in your lane?
So I think that's a good question. Just in general, democracy is a participatory event. If you don't get up and vote, if you don't get up and make your voice heard, you're not participating in what democracy is all about. So regardless of whether or not you're a basketball player, a lawyer, an actual politician, a school teacher, a student, or an artist, it is all of our responsibility to participate in this democracy in whatever way that you feel comfortable. So that's the first thing that I would say. And the second thing about art being sort of above the fray of politics, I think how people use art to relax or to kind of take themselves out of their mundane daily kinds of routines, that's how people use it. But artists have always been very political. One example that I like to use is Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, originally written in honor of Napoleon Bonaparte. But once Napoleon decided to crown himself emperor, Beethoven took that as just a blow against democracy and freedom in Europe, and he kind of very angrily scratched out Napoleon's name and made it what we now know as the Eroica Symphony No. 3. And so composers have always been politically engaged. Even right now, I'm so honored. I'm working on an opera premiere with the Santa Fe Opera. That's a collaborative production with a number of different opera companies across the country, based upon the life of voting rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer, who very famously addressed the Democratic National Committee. If people have heard the phrase, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired," she is the one who said it first in talking about being beaten, losing her job, being threatened with violence on a regular and ongoing basis, simply for trying to register Black people to vote in the South. And so we're doing this opera premiere, and we actually did the first production just before the election. In 2020. It was the first live in-person opera production in New York after the pandemic. Everybody was masked up. Again, this is something you can see online. And the title of that small production was called This is America. And we thought it was important to show that art and politics and democracy can very beautifully go hand in hand, to again remind everyone that democracy is participatory.
Thank you. Okay, well, it looks like we are running out of time. I'm so glad to catch you in the middle of your busy schedule and convince you to join us today. I look forward to seeing you again when live music returns to the world, particularly, potentially as an conductor guest. I want to again express our thanks from the Lower Merion Human Relations Commission for joining us this month on our program from the HRC. If you'd like to learn more about the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra, you can visit the Black Pearl online at www.blackpearlco.org. And thank you, our viewers, for joining us this month. We have more programs scheduled ahead where we will talk about what initiatives our Township HRC is working on. Till then, thanks for joining us.